All right, folks, the Horns 24/7 quad box is back. Steve Sarkisian finally available to the media for the first time since the college football playoffs ended a month ago now at this point. So we got to hear about the 30 new Longhorns making their way or already on the 40 acres. Here with Eric Henry, Chip Brown, Jeff Howe. Guys, appreciate you joining me. We're going to go one by one here, and Chip, we'll start with you here. So we'll bring it down to the Horns 24/7 2 box. Chip, biggest thing that stood out from Steve Sarkisian's press conference today was the fact that he said he's now obsessed with going and winning a national championship at Texas after being in the college football playoff this last season and getting a taste of what it's like to be competing for a championship. What do you make of those comments? And are the Longhorns on their way to potentially do that in 2024 and beyond?
Well, this is what you want to hear if you're a Texas Longhorns fan, because look, Steve Sarkisian, his two mentors, Pete Carroll and Nick Saban, those guys were relentless. You've got to be kind of obsessed. You have to be relentless to be able to consistently be in the college football playoff or be in contention for conference championships and the national championships. So he also said complacency is the devil and that he's, needs that to be, that urgency needs to be all over the Texas football complex. Steve Sarkisian has not made very many, sideways steps in the off seasons since he's come to Texas. And he learned from the best in Nick Saban. And hopefully Steve Sarkisian is able to, carry that obsession, if you will, and kind of infuse it into the culture that he's building, and will have to continue to refuse and kind of reinvigorate, I should say, each year as players move on from his program. The experienced leadership that helped establish the culture that helped them to a 12-2 season. They also need to be obsessed. And so, look, you take your cues from the guy on top, and so that's what you want to hear. And he said, I don't want to hear anyone telling us how we've arrived. And so that's good to hear. It sounds like Steve Sarkisian's plenty hungry for this team to be a contender each and every year.
You mentioned sideways steps and how Steve Sarkisian has not taken a lot of those. Well, one place he certainly hasn't done that is in the wide receiver room. So we'll bring Eric in here to talk about that. Eric, in the high school ranks, you get a guy like Ryan Wingo, five-star wide receiver. Aaron Butler comes in at the buzzer. Two solid guys in Freddie Dubose and Parker Livingstone. But the transfer portal really has stolen a lot of the attention. You get Isaiah Bond, the number one, if I'm not mistaken, wide receiver in the 24/7 Sports transfer portal rankings, and two solid more guys in Matthew Golden and Silas Bolden. You lose Xavier Worthy, you lose Adonai Mitchell, and although he was a tight end, you lose Tavian Sanders. That was their third biggest receiving threat. It seems like Steve Sarkisian has just simply hit the reload button in the wide receiver room. Eric, what do you make of these new bodies coming to the 40 acres, and what do you make of Steve Sarkisian's comments about them from his presser today?
Tommy, it's not often that you can take a look at a room that was only returning 3 scholarship players and returning only 9 receptions from the receiver spot and say that that's going to be a strength of the football team. However, Steve Sarkisian was adamant. He felt that getting the additions in the portal, you talked about it, right? You start with a Matt Golden from Houston, who, of course, scored touchdowns against Texas when these two teams played last year. And then you get an Isaiah Bond, and you talk about, just the litany of players you get in this class. And it feels like a genuine strength of this football team. When you talk about the way Steve Sarkisian wants to do things, right? In terms of being versatile and being able to play positionless football with the receivers. You go back to his time in Alabama, Tommy, and you see the way he's able to use those receivers like chess pieces, guys who can line up on the outside, could line up in the slot, line up all over the field. And he's really got that this year. So in my mind, you take a look at the additions in the transfer portal. And then, of course, you can't forget about guys like Jonte Cook and Ryan Niblett, who, of course, while certainly didn't get a ton of playing time last year, Jonte Cook was the primary freshman who saw playing time in 2023. Those are still guys who are 4- and 5-star recruits, or in theory, a year ahead of some of these incoming guys. So there's no doubt that there's a level of competition amongst these guys. But listen, again, when you talk about Matthew Golden and you get an Isaiah Bond and just getting the versatility of these guys as a whole, Tommy, in my mind, and you get a Quinn Ewers back at quarterback, there's no reason to believe in my mind that this wide receiver group can't be a strength of this team, especially, again, with the way that Steve Sarkisian wants to use them. This could possibly, and it might be scary to think about this, Tommy, unlock a different dimension of Steve Sarkisian's offense that, quite frankly, we haven't seen at Texas in his entire tenure.
And Eric, I think a big part of what could unlock that for Steve Sarkisian is the fact that he's got Quinn Ewers returning at quarterback. That centerpiece, I think, is so crucial to the offense, especially for an offensive-minded guy like Sarkisian, who is able to do his best work with receivers and getting them open. Now, we've talked about strengths of the Longhorns, and one of the strengths this past season was the interior defensive line, but now we're going to bring in Jeff to talk about how Steve Sarkisian and company look to replace two guys who could be first, second rounders in the NFL draft in Byron Murphy and T'Vondre Sweat. Jeff, it's never easy regardless, but Steve Sarkisian goes to the transfer portal a little bit and he goes to the high school ranks a little bit here, but I think you could still say that there might be some concerns for this group at this point in time. Going into the year, what did Sarkisian have to say about the interior of the defensive line today and just the defensive line as a whole?
Yeah, you get the feeling, Tommy, that he's concerned with numbers, and he should be at this point. Like, there's talent in that room, right? We've seen Alfred Collins flash. Vernon Broughton quietly, I thought, had a pretty good year last year in 2023, but you're going to need to get it consistently from Alfred Collins. The problem is what's behind those guys. Getting Tia Savea out of the portal from Arizona, that's a godsend at this point, because at least you've got a guy not all that different from Trill Carter. I don't know that you're going to expect Savea to come in and be a world beater just to be able to dominate at the point of attack and to gobble up the lion's share of the snaps. But he's a veteran body. He's got experience at the Power 5 level, and you could probably trust him in a lot of different situations, use him in some different shades, use some of that versatility a little bit. So he's a guy that can help Texas. Where it really gets concerning is now your margin for error, it's not near as wide as it was last year, because you're going to need to get something out of Sadir Mitchell, that group of Jeray Bledsoe, Zach Swanson, Aaron Bryant. You're going to need to get something out of those guys. I even think a young guy like Alex January coming in from Duncanville, he's on campus right now. I mean, if Alex January has a big winter conditioning, has a big spring, and then has a big summer, you could see Alex January as early as that Michigan game playing high leverage snaps for this team. I think the need is that big, Tommy. I mean, you can't replace T'Vondre Sweat and Byron Murphy. You're not going to replace T'Vondre Sweat and Byron Murphy, not just for the snap-to-snap consistency that those guys gave you, but from what they did for you from a leadership standpoint, from a culture standpoint, to set the tone defensively. You can't expect anybody to just step into those shoes. Alfred Collins and Vernon Broughton have to be themselves. So what I do think is, I think when that spring portal window opens, I think you'll see Texas be really active. They'll call that thing. They'll leave no stone unturned if they can get another quality body. Maybe not even a depth piece. If there's a guy that can maybe come in and push Broughton and Collins for snaps and give you, again, a little bit more margin for error with those young guys, where maybe you don't have to throw them into the fire. That's going to be huge for this defensive line. At some point, those guys in the 2022 class and Sadir Mitchell, who was your only take in 2023, at some point those guys are going to have to show you something, and you're going to have to make the decision, hey, either we can work with these guys and build something, or we're going to have to just cut bait and move on, and those guys are going to be recruited over. I know that sounds harsh, but that's just kind of the way the game is played now, and that's not a Texas thing. That's when you're one of the elite teams in college football. You're going to have guys hit the portal that are going to be frontline guys immediately for somebody else. So, that time is coming, especially for those three guys in that 2022 signing class. And I really like Alex January, the potential he's got, but Sark made no bones about it today, Tommy. He's really looking at that defensive line room thinking he's got talent, but the numbers aren't quite where he wants it to be. And Kenny Baker, he's really excited about the Kenny Baker hire. I mean, I know Eric had the article a couple of weeks ago, getting some quotes talking to Tyson Helton about when he had him at Western Kentucky as an assistant coach and coming off that Pete Jenkins coaching tree, really learning how to coach that position from a legend like Pete Jenkins. And then Sark during the press conference, he name drops Mike McDaniel and Chris Greer. That's the head coach and the GM of the Dolphins, where Kenny Baker was last year. So I think Sark is high on Kenny Baker. There's no question about that. But I think, like their position coach, this is a group that's got some question marks. There are concerns, but you can definitely see some upside with this group. And I think it could be a much different tone regarding the interior defensive line come November, December than what it is now, where you're looking at that group thinking, man, you just wish you had a little bit more in terms of numbers.
Yeah, a lot of questions certainly surrounding the new defensive line coach, Kenny Baker, and that room and how it stands right now. But spring practice is coming up, so maybe we get a little bit more insight there in the next coming weeks. All right, we're going to expand back to the quad box here now, fellas. And we mentioned earlier in the video that 30 new Longhorns coming in, both from the transfer portal and from high school ranks. Out of all 30 of those, each of us are going to go down and pick one that we believe is going to have the biggest impact. Not necessarily, it doesn't have to be this year, but even down the line. For me, I'm going to go with Wardell Mack. This is a really, really quiet get because it's overshadowed by the elite defensive back talent that Texas was able to get down the stretch, and Xavier Filsaime, Kobe Black, and Andrew Makuba. But getting Wardell Mack from Florida, I think, was a huge flip for Texas. They just have a plethora of riches in that defensive back room, and we could be sitting here in a couple of years realizing that Wardell Mack was the best of that unit. I absolutely love his game, so I'm going to go with Wardell Mack, but I won't take up too much time. Chip, you're up next.
Well, I'm right there in that same position group with you, Tommy. I wrote in the Insider, excuse me, I'm getting all choked up about this. I wrote in the Insider last week that Xavier Filsaime, the safety from McKinney, is showing early positive. He's getting positive reviews in winter conditioning, and so at this point, I will take that as a big time positive. Sometimes those freshmen show up and they just have a different way about them. I think Xavier Filsaime has shown that early. So let's see if he can continue it and fight for some of that playing time that Steve Sarkisian had among 5 safeties last year.
Yeah, I'm going to stick on defense, but I'll leave the secondary. I'll go up front, specifically to the edge. I think it's got to be a combination of Colin Simmons and Trey Moore. Look, with Trey Moore, you don't recruit an edge rusher out of the portal for him to come in and be a rotational guy or to maybe kind of feel his way through. You're counting on that guy to be an impact player. And, I know Sark talked today about wanting to get a little more sticky in coverage. Well, it's kind of one of those chicken and egg things, right? Does better coverage mean better pass rush, or could a better pass rush give you better coverage on the back end? We've seen Sark kind of devote really more resources to coverage. Now you're devoting resources to getting a push. And look, you go back to that Washington game in the Sugar Bowl. That was one of the differences in that game. As good as Barron Sorrell was last season, as good of a year as Ethan Burke had, Texas didn't have that guy that on a predictable passing down that the other team really feared, that no matter what they did, he had a chance to bend the corner and get after the quarterback and affect the play. Trey Moore can be that guy. Colin Simmons situationally could be that guy as a true freshman, and they need to be. Between those two guys, Ethan Burke and Barron Sorrell, and then whoever else steps up, maybe a Justice Finkley takes a step forward, or Jamon Tapp, maybe Colton Vosick, whoever it is, you can kind of moneyball some things at defensive end based on situations, but on predictable passing downs, to me, it's got to either be Trey Moore or Colin Simmons making the plays that are going to get Texas over the hump from being a team good enough to get to the college football playoff to being a team that's good enough to win in the CFP and get to a national championship game.
I like that call, Jeff. I think Colin Simmons is a Joseph Osai starter kit. So I think that's a good call.
And I think in general, Chip, that buck position in PK's defense, I think you'll continue to see them recruit the way they are. It's going to start to look more like what he had at Washington, where I think, that jack end's going to be kind of more the 6'3", 6'4", kind of 260, more bulky type guy. Whereas that buck end, think about the buck end when Texas had Brian Orakpo or Sergio Kendall. That guy's going to be more of a 235, 240-ish type guy that he's on the field. He can play, but he's on the field for one reason, and that's to get behind the line of scrimmage and bring the quarterback down.
Yeah, and I'll kind of piggyback off of both Jeff's and Chip's points. I'll try my best not to get choked up here, but I think you take a look at Andrew Makuba. I think that's a really interesting addition. Really, a guy who, when Steve Sarkisian talked about a guy like him. He doesn't leave Clemson, someone who was a 3-year starter, and say, "Hey, I'm just coming to Texas for the heck of it." Right? He's coming here for a purpose, with a purpose. Steve Sarkisian talked about already seeing his approach to the game, his approach to how he's going about this transfer, being very intentional about the way he's doing things. And I almost kind of liken it in a sense, guys, to A.D. Mitchell, right? Someone who, while certainly not an Austin native, had his reasons for coming back to Lone Star State and coming to Texas, and, was, hey, I'm coming here for a reason. I'm 1 year, and then I'm ideally going to the National Football League. I think Andrew Makuba, you talk about that safety position. Chip talked about it earlier, right? Is the situation where, are they going to play 4 or 5 safeties again? Was that a situation where it was necessary, or is that a talent thing, right? In my mind, listen, if they're going to play multiple safeties, then let's hope you got multiple safeties who are upper echelon, high tier types of talent. So Xavier Filsaime and Andrew Makuba, Derek Williams Jr., those guys all combine to play to the level that we believe they can play to. And you're talking about arguably the best safety room, definitely in the SEC and quite possibly in the nation as well. So that's someone from an impact perspective, as far as coming in and making an immediate impact, really keep an eye on him to see if he can be the difference maker that, quite frankly, Steve Sarkisian seems to expect him to be in 2024.
I think I think two things branching off of that, Eric. One, I think it goes back to local players. Sark talked about that today. If guys in the Austin area are good enough to play at Texas, Texas needs to make sure they get those guys. There can't be any more situations where, a guy like James Lynch at Round Rock, Garrett Wilson at Lake Travis, where those guys are going to other places and emerging as NFL draft picks. And then I think the other thing, and Chip, I'll let you take it from here. If Texas signed a wide receiver from Alabama out of the portal and a tight end from Alabama out of the portal, I'm going to go ahead and guarantee, rubber stamp it, that Isaiah Bond and Amari Niblack are going to have a much bigger impact on this program than a Jai Hall and Jaleel Billingsley did. Call it a. I know I'm really going out on a limb there, but at least you've gotten the bad Bama skill guys out of the way. I think these two moves are going to be much better for Texas in 2024 and beyond.
I think that hot take is going to age very well. But
let's hope it does.
I'll mention the other Alabama transfer. Sark talked about him today, Kendrick Blackshire. He's a big-bodied guy who Alabama really liked. This was a player. I mean, obviously, all these players were impact guys in the Alabama program. Didn't want to lose them. We've seen Isaiah Bond and Amari Niblack. Bond had the biggest catch of the college football season last year in the, disaster in the pasture at Auburn from the Auburn perspective. But Kendrick Blackshire is a guy who could come right in and really add to that inside linebacker position. And so that's another player you definitely have to keep your eye on.
So a lot of defense here is what I'm noticing. So many offensive weapons for the Longhorns, but we all harped on defense. And I think the secondary especially is going to be extremely crucial for Texas just because it was such a glaring weakness for them last year, especially against Washington when Michael Penix threw it all over the back half of the Longhorns secondary. So we'll see how everything goes here in the next couple of weeks with spring practices coming up, winter conditioning going on as well. Make sure you stick around horns247.com for the latest and greatest from these group of guys and our fantastic recruiting analysts and Hank South and Jordan Scruggs. That's going to do it for us here on the Horns 24/7 YouTube channel. Appreciate you all stopping by and watching. While you're here, make sure you give this video a like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on post notifications so you're the first to know when new content's coming your way. For Eric Henry, Chip Brown, and Jeff Howe, I'm Tommy Yarrish. We'll see you next time.